Welcome to the WWH show. This is a show that asks a series of why, what, and how questions on topics that have national, regional, and global significance and implications. Today, we have a great topic to talk about: why women are not at the front end leading. In this studio, I have a great guest to talk about. Her name is Veronica Adams. She is a learning and development consultant. She has masters in organizational development, and she has been working on diversity and inclusive works. She has done so many research on women and how women can become leaders. Today we're going to talk about that. Thank you very much for coming, Veronica.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm glad that we're going to talk about how women are great, but they're not at the front end leading. In history, we have great women, for example, Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa, and other great women right now leading in politics, in charity, and research development. If you go to my country, we had great women like Queen Tegit Aitu and charity leader Ababach Gobena, and there are many women right now who work hard, fight for democracy, justice, the rule of law, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, as much as they work hard and contribute the lion's share in their family, in their community, in their organization and nation, they're not valued that much. They're not at the front and taking leadership. Why that?
Well, one reason, I believe, is that women don't promote themselves as much. I think women, they've done research on women's brains. They're slightly different from a very young age at birth, where it's wired differently. We tend to be more relational, and so I think, and then with a lot of social culturalization, we are trained to not self-promote ourselves as much. So that's part of the reason that gets in the way.
So do you think this not promoting themselves a cultural thing? Because I was thinking women, for example, in the Western world, they are even encouraged, I believe, I don't know. But in communal culture like ours, or in South America, Asia, and also in Africa, many African countries, women are not encouraged to promote themselves. So whenever they stand up for themselves, when they promote themselves, when they become leaders, they are despised. It may not be publicly or it may not be overtly, but they are despised even by other women.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They've done, now a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is focused on situation here in the United States. That's my experience. That's what the research that I did. I do think it definitely has application elsewhere, but I'll let other people extrapolate on that. But basically, yes, as far as self-promotion, there's something called the Goldilocks syndrome.
Okay.
Are you familiar? Are you familiar with the?
Explain me.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale about Goldilocks and the three bears. The little girl who was lost in the woods and went to a cabin, and then she went to this cabin where these three bears lived, but they were out. So she went in and helped herself. And basically there was the papa bear, the mama bear, and the little bear, the baby bear. And so she would lie in the bed, and the papa's bed was too hard, the baby's bed was too soft, and the mama's bed was just right. Anyway, that's Goldilocks, and she got a little bit in a little bit of trouble when the bears came home. Like, what was she doing in their cabin? But anyway, it's a well-known fairy tale in the U.S. And anyway, so Goldilocks, the Goldilocks syndrome is it's never just right. I mean, women are too hard. You know, when they're trying to be assertive, they're considered too hard. Or they're too soft. Oh, she's not going to be tough enough. And this comes from women very much as well, from other women criticizing them. basically they've taken a resume. They've done this test numerous times. It's the same resume, and it'll have the name Harry on the top. And then they'll do the same resume with the name Harriet, and they'll run it by a whole bunch of people. Are you familiar with this study?
No,
Have you heard about this?
No.
Basically, the men and the women, they look at Harry's resume and they go, wow, look at all those accomplishments. What a guy, man. I think he'd be a great boss. I'd like to have a beer or coffee with him.
Yeah, let me meet
nice
him.
guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Same resume, but it's Harriet. Well, she's gotten a lot done, but, I bet she's not a very nice person. I bet she's just, I wouldn't want to know her, probably. I wouldn't want to work for her.
This resentment is only from men or women?
No, it's from both.
Wow.
Yeah, and actually, it's a lot of women are actually harder on other women than men.
This first stressed me because, women, they have maybe 50% of their population, wherever they are, it could be in Africa, in Asia, or in South America, or in America, or in Europe. And I saw one research, it says that 73% of the workload is shouldered by women. Mm-hmm. But in leadership, they're not even 10% of the women in leadership.
Oh, yeah.
So this is really very disappointing, because here are women working hard. They are half of the population. They take load of 73%, but they're not even leaders 50% of the time. So this is really a wastage of potential, and it not only hurts women, it also hurts men, it hurts the nations, the organizations, and the families.
Absolutely, yeah. In the U.S., women are over half the workforce and over half of the college graduates. Yet, we're anywhere from 3 to 10% max of the leaders across the sectors.
Shouldn't this bother both men and women?
One would think, yes, right. But basically, well, let me get back to how I started this research that I did, and I wrote this recommendations report on how women's leadership development should be done very differently than how it's been done for the last 30 years. I was hired to conduct a number of interviews with people who have worked with one renowned leadership development organization with their women's leadership development program for a number of years. Ever since this organization, Center for Creative Leadership 28 years ago came out with a study called Breaking the Glass Ceiling, and Are Women Ready to Lead? I can't remember the exact title. Anyway, so that was about 28 years ago, and then since that became, at the forefront, that discussion, women's leadership development programs started growing up everywhere. But little has shifted in all of that time as far as the numbers go. And so I conducted these interviews and also did some reading of various studies. Sheryl Sandberg's book had just come out, if you're familiar with Sheryl Sandberg, the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, who wrote that book, Lean In. But basically, a lot of the criticisms, a lot of the concerns about how women's leadership development is that it focuses on fixing the woman, right?
Ignoring the man.
Well, and trying to get women to morph into this certain prescribed way that leadership is supposedly supposed to look, right? And it's a no-win situation because of what I told you about the Goldilocks syndrome. She's either too hard or too soft. It's called the likability factor also. Okay. Well, she might be successful in some ways, but she's probably not very likable. So so that the focus has been on trying to get women to change, and again, I think it's been a no-win situation, versus, as some people have said, look at what's wrong with the system, what's wrong with the model of leadership. Yes, women make up, half of the population, but what about men? What is the role that men play? Is there anything that they need to learn and develop? And that's what yes, men need to be learning and developing themselves as well. And I believe that if men and women are working together at how sexism impacts both of them, they can work together to change the system and expand the models of leadership in ways that are really going to help our organizations, our companies to be far more successful financially, to become more innovative, and to create a society that's far more family and child friendly than we are here in the U.S. And we have a whole lot of problems in that area.
But by the way, we talked about why women are not in leadership because of some biases. Some of them are cultural. But what about women? Why they don't take leadership initiatives? Why they themselves take leadership initiatives?
Yes.
And claim their rightful place?
Well, that's, again, men and women, I think, need to look, again, at the system that is inhibiting both of them in their growth and development, and having economic impact and societal impact. But one thing that happens when any group of people is marginalized over a period of time, that group develops something that's called internalized oppression. I don't know if you've heard that term. Yeah, basically, and you can see this with various religious groups, ethnic groups, racially, people with disabilities, GLBT people. Often they start believing the propaganda or the media about themselves. They're not as smart, they're not as pretty, they're not as moral, they're not as capable, so on and so forth. They did studies in this country, Brown versus Board of Education, with the little African American children who were shown little white dolls and little black dolls, and they were asked which one was pretty. And these tiny little children would look at the little white doll and say, that one's pretty, this one isn't. It was heartbreaking. But anyway, we get these messages at a very young age when our group is marginalized or discriminated against in the society. So women across the world, but I'm again focusing on the U.S., because of this internalized oppression, we start not having the same level of confidence in our abilities. We're told that if we promote ourselves and have confidence, that it's not going to be feminine and people won't like us, right? So there's this, it's tragic in a way, talk about loss of human potential, is we have all of these women at war within themselves, holding themselves back, taking second chair when they could be leading, and turning on each other. That's the other impact of internalized oppression. We hear this all the time, black on black violence, some of the, in Native American reservations in this country, some of the, the violence and women around the world who are horrible to their daughter-in-laws because it's the pecking order. When you are in an oppressed group, we tend to buy into the pecking order, right? So I'm low on the chain, so I'm going to pick on you, as opposed to coming together and saying, look, there's power in numbers. Let's empower each other. Let's raise each other up,
So one of the reasons why women are not taking leadership is, as you said, internal oppression, which is within the women itself. And also it's about even people who are already oppressed. They're not coming together and using their number. They should have been empower one another so that they would have been promoted to become leaders. Some countries identified that problem, and they think that it's very difficult or challenging for women to come out and become leaders. They have some efforts like, for example, celebrating March 8th, and they came up with some affirmative actions and so on. These happened in the past, but it looks like now empowering women to leadership flatlined or stagnated. There is no more momentum right now. Why is that?
Well, again, I think it's a combination of factors. It's the internalized oppression, we women holding one another back. I like the term, we've drunk the Kool-Aid, we believe the propaganda. And also there's this whole system that is it's difficult to overcome. There are a lot of men in the world who like women. They like their moms. They like their wives.
They like their sister.
Yeah, right. They would not ever intentionally discriminate against them or want them to have any harm. But men are often not conscious of some of the ways in which they are treated differently. It's called unconscious privilege. And again, it's a systemic issue that exists, across various quote-unquote privileged groups. In this country, there's what's called unconscious white privilege. A lot of European Americans like myself, we're just not aware of some of the ways that we are treated differently day in and day out. Not our fault. You don't necessarily recognize the air you breathe. But once something is brought to your consciousness, then you can, pay attention and start looking for opportunities to start leveraging your advantage to make sure that other people are treated the same way as you are, to become what I call allies. So anyway, men need to become more, men who are care about women need to raise their consciousness about the various privileges that they have, how they're treated differently from women, and then help to educate other men about that.
Do you have some examples about some of the unintentional or subconscious level things that men are doing to hold back women?
Well, I'm more familiar, there's something called the unconscious backpack, the invisible knapsack of white privilege, which is something that came out by a European American women's studies professor about 25 years ago. And she was looking at, she taught at Wellesley, her name was Peggy McIntosh, and she was trying to look at how men had this unconscious male privilege, even there in her own circle there at Wellesley. And then from that, she started thinking in terms of herself as a white woman, how maybe she had unconscious privilege. So, some of the same things apply. So I could say, as a white woman, as a white person, I can express my opinion about something and never have it said never have to consider that other people are saying, oh, well, she's saying that because of her race. I mean, no, that's not a very good example. That does happen, but I can go anywhere that I want and expect to be able to get a taxi. I can go into any organization in any service business, and expect to be treated cordially. And if I'm not treated cordially, I don't have to say, oh, it's because of my race. So men often, they'll go about in the world. They don't have to think about when they're having a conversation with somebody, oh, is that person questioning whether or not I'll be cool in a crisis situation? Is that person concerned about whether I'm going to be, whether I'm too emotional to be a leader? Basically, there's one thing. Men often have what's called, you've heard the term old boys network?
Yeah.
Right? That does exist. Men are often more comfortable mentoring other men. If you want to move up in this world, you have got to have mentors. So a lot of men, they're just more comfortable mentoring other men. And the whole let's go golfing, let's go bowling, let's whatever, let's hang out together.
Yeah.
And now there have been more efforts for people to mentor women. And men have to mentor women because they often have the more powerful positions. But there's also something that has to be done, which is called advocacy. Not enough men are being advocates for women. There's a difference between mentoring and advocate. I can sit with you on the phone or in your office and we can have a coaching session, right? But an advocate is somebody who's actually in my organization, who's going around and saying, hey,
she's great.
Paul, she's great. You should
strength.
think about her for this position. Or she's really, you should really help develop her. She's got great potential, right? It's,
that's missing because, you're right. I know many men who appreciate women, who would like to work with them, support them, mentor them, as you say, but very few of them, go the extra mile and promote,
right,
and encourage and publicly talk about women,
right? Because
there are cultural limitations and some taboos and so on and so forth. But I personally believe that there is a difference culturally. For example, the way things are done. For example, in the Western culture or in the individual-based culture, there are some efforts by organizations and nations. There are, for example, awareness trainings about sexual discrimination or sexual harassment and so on. So at least the men are aware of if they stumble or, for example, if they overtly, publicly make a mistake in discriminating women, for example, they're going to pay a price because the system doesn't promote that kind of things. I mean, they have to be accountable. But go to communal cultures, in cultures like mine, the women, for example, there are no education. There are no educations about sexual harassment or sexual discriminations and so on. So that means the culture, the system, and the government is not out there promoting the needs and the aspirations of women. It doesn't go out and protect women's rights. But at least in individual-based cultures or in Western cultures, the system, the media, and the governments, at least they make effort to protect. If not, they promote, at least they protect the rights of women.
Right. I believe that if we had more models of leadership development that were helping women and men to understand some of this unconscious stuff that's at work, the internalized oppression and how it impacts women, and the unconscious privilege that men have and how it impacts them. And, really do the introspective work to see how it plays out in people's individual lives, and then have a discussion and learn together different ways for men to coach and be advocates for women, to support women in developing greater confidence, and to heck with the likability factor. And I believe that if men and women were both growing and expanding definitions of leaderships, this sort of conversation around, sexual harassment would be part of the conversation, and that I think right now, because that broader conversation is lacking, there's a lot of accusation. Oh, he did this. And so there's this accusation and this sort of knee-jerk reaction, and then men just sort of shut down and don't do the coaching and the mentoring and the advocacy work. If we had healthier conversations, then women could say, gee, when you do this, this is how it makes me feel. Or men could say, how I did this, how come that makes you uncomfortable? I don't understand, right?
Yeah.
There would be, I guess what I'm trying to say, there would be greater trust. So when individuals trust each other, they can work through some of those more difficult dynamics and learn together.
So education is very important. Raising the awareness of both women and men is very important.
But doing it together so they build trust. Does that make sense?
Yeah, doing together rather than just targeting men or women independently. Why don't we create that kind of bond between the two so that they may develop trust? When there is trust, there is a potential that they may work together, because they may sense that, hey, this problem that women are facing is also a challenge to our community, to our organization, to our nation. So let's tackle it. This is a common enemy and problem. Let's do it together. So bringing them together, I think, is not something that many organizations and nations are doing.
They're not. They have women's leadership development women doing, this leadership development maybe for a week or so, and then they'll come back together and do the leadership development with the men. I do think it's important for the different gender identity groups to do some individual work, but learning the same things, learning some of the same stuff about these systemic issues, like the internalized oppression, the unconscious privilege, and so on. But then coming together with a shared vocabulary, a shared understanding, and then start talking about it together.
In my country, for example, in Ethiopia, there is, a problem. I mean, there are so many problems, okay? Dictatorship, poverty, terrorism, and so on and so forth. And the women are not actively involving, mainly because the system doesn't allow them. I remember a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago, the government shut down one of the associations, Lawyers Women Association. Think about it. I mean, these women are trying to fight for women, because in Ethiopia there is a huge oppression of women because of, the system is not protecting it, and the media and also the system, the government is not protecting women's rights. But when we see the problem, the challenge the country faces, we can't really come out of this challenge without women involving. Now, as we fight, for example, for justice, democracy, to eradicate poverty, to also fight for discrimination against women and so on, without women involving, it's impossible. And I don't think that many of the government systems, institutions are ready to empower women. And the women themselves, there are very few women I know, they come together. Here in the diaspora, I heard last time that some of the women that I admire, I appreciate, they came together and they're trying to figure out why we should always see men at the front. Go to, in the politics, go to in the community organizations, go to the business and so on. You always see men. You don't see women. And obviously we have, this huge challenge and problem as a country, and we are, leaving out the majority of the population because we're not smart enough to bring them at the front.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't see how we can come out of poverty, dictatorship, without women involving in the fight, without encouraging and bringing women into the mix, because men alone cannot fight the dictatorship, cannot fight poverty, cannot fight Poverty cannot fight environmental degradation. We need the wisdom, the patience, the detail-orientedness of women. We don't just need the strength of men.
Right. Well, smart men get that. So thank you.
No problem.
But that's why it is so important for what I call allyship, for any group that has greater advantage to be proactive allies. The civil rights movement in this country, you know, that movie Selma came out recently. You know, there were people, Southern Leadership Conference, and different African American organizations fighting racism. But it wasn't until you get larger numbers of white people who are saying this is wrong, and showing up and speaking out. They had greater power, greater influence over white people, that it started shifting. Okay, historically, that's how it always goes. You've got to have those who have greater advantage at the forefront, leading the conversation and modeling. So in this situation, we're talking about other men, other smart men who say this is wrong and we're shooting ourselves in the foot, that have to be allies. So I was reading about one effort on part of a United Nations organization in Ethiopia called Community Conversations.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really great because it's an effort to go into various communities and engage men and boys as well as the women, and start having conversations in a safe space about their ideas about women and some of their assumptions and some of their practices, and having those conversations, and in the course of that starting to shift some of their ideas. So then these men and boys have successfully helped to change some other attitudes. So that's the sort of thing that's needed.
But by the way, I know there are many challenges women are facing right now in the world. Mm-hmm. What are the top 3, for example, challenges women are facing right now, and what they are doing to alleviate these challenges? There are many challenges in Ethiopia, around the world, but let's say, what are the top 3 challenges women are facing globally, and what they are doing about it?
Well, I guess women are people too. So when you ask me what's the number one challenge that women are facing, I'm thinking, well, what's the number one challenge that I think human beings are facing? I happen to believe that global warming, unless we deal with it very quickly, climate change.
But it affects both men and women.
We're all up.
So we're talking about
we're all up the creek.
Yeah. For example, let me give you a good example. In Ethiopia, one of the top challenges that's preventing people, for example, people like myself and other people from the wrong ethnic group, going back to Ethiopia and invest our knowledge, is because of ethnicism. There is discrimination based on ethnicity. It doesn't discriminate only men and women. If you are a woman, if you are a man, if you are from the a very wrong ethnic group, you are discriminated. You are a second citizen in that country. You are secondary. No, you're not primary. You're born there, that's your country, but you're treated as a second. So this affects both men and women. But when we see the women's problem in Ethiopia, the first thing is the culture itself is not promoting, for example, the cultural, because if the culture is not supporting women to come out and promote their rights in their community, and unless they get incentives, unless they are appreciated and encouraged to go out culturally, it's very hard. So like that, what are some of the challenges that, for example, women in America are facing, or in Europe or other parts of the world?
So you want to get back to gender specific
yes,
again?
Yeah, gender specific. But I my passion right now is, hey, there are many challenges women are facing, which are specific to women. But there are very few women fighting for that. The majority of the women are just maybe they're not proactive. Maybe they care about the issues, but they're not going out and fighting. I like what Rosa Parks said. She said, "I'm tired of being treated like a second-class citizen." That, kept her moving, fighting for her right, and that changed the whole momentum. One woman determined, sick and tired of being treated as a second citizen. In Ethiopia, for example, I don't think that they are even treated as second-class citizens. They are third, because some of the ethnic group men themselves treated as second class.
Yeah.
They are maybe third-class citizens in Ethiopia. Yeah. But we need the fight from the women themselves to go out and act like Rosa Parks. Enough is enough. I don't want to be treated as a third-class citizen in this country. This is my country. Right. And why don't they start and show that energy? Because they can win if they only fight.
Right. I mean, you've put out a number of different points, but I mean, physical safety matters. Okay, so I can speak from a very privileged perspective about women in the United States going out there and fighting for their rights. I think it's a rather different situation in some other parts of the world where women's safety is so much more of an issue if they do try to speak out. Violence against women is very common in a lot of developing nations, even more so than in this country. So that is a factor, and that is why it is ever so much more important for men in your country to be allies. They have to start influencing other men and saying violence against women is not okay. And the churches, I went to Harvard Divinity School. I mentioned that to you. I have a Master of Divinity. The churches, the religious institutions have got to start speaking out. For far too long and far too many situations throughout history, they have either turned a blind eye or actually even said things to support things like slavery in this country. Slavery in this country would not have gone on for over 400 years if a lot of the religious institutions, the churches, hadn't said things in favor of it. So the same thing with violence against women.
I want us to talk a little bit about religion, because religion is very powerful. I can't speak about, for example, Muslim or Buddhism and so on, but I can speak about Christianity because I'm a Christian. And I see some hypocrisy, think about it. Jesus, the founder of Christianity, he worked with women. For that matter, the first woman who preached about his resurrection was Mary, a woman.
Yes, absolutely.
But the founder has been that much, he was inclusive.
Yes,
He
absolutely.
embraced women. But think about the religious elites now trying to discriminate women, trying to tell the world that they can't stand on the pulpit and preach because of some doctrines and dogmas. So for me, this is hypocrisy. So religious institutions and religious leaders, they should change their mind. For that matter, I have seen many churches, the key players are women. Mm-hmm. But they're not promoted. They're not put at the front.
No, second chair.
Class.
Second chair. Yeah. Very rarely in a lot of cultures are they actually in the pulpit leading the church. But yes, Jesus was absolutely an advocate for women. There are many parables where he's with women involved, where he's protecting them and calling for people
we're talking
not
about,
to cast the first
2,000 years of this person we're talking about.
Right.
That time women didn't have a right to vote. Women were considered even not full enough to testify. So at that time we had this smart person embracing and talking about the greatness of women and working with them. After 2,000 years later, we didn't get it.
Well, again, male-dominated institutions have created these this dogma. I mean, Jesus. Well, let me also go to Muhammad. Muhammad was a great advocate on behalf of women. He outlawed infanticide, female infanticide. Girl babies were not valued, and they were murdered all over the place. He said that women should have inheritance rights, which they hadn't before. He had many wives, primarily, as I understand it, to protect them, because these were widows of many of his generals and battle leaders. So he was, he said that women, yes, one could have more than one wife, as long as that man could support and take care of each of those women equally. So he was a great advocate on behalf of women. And he had a very smart, older, wealthy woman who was his wife. So that probably helped him with some of his enlightened attitudes. Buddha, also, a lot of our great spiritual leaders throughout history have valued and been advocates on behalf of women. But unfortunately, throughout history as well, a lot of our religious institutions have, again, been male-dominated and upheld discrimination against women, various ethnic groups, racial groups. So I think it behooves all enlightened men and women to speak to their religious leaders and say, no more. You need to start speaking out against discrimination, against sexism, against racism, against xenophobia, and call us to our better selves. I mean, we've seen really bad examples in our religious institutions, but if you also think about the people who have most inspired humanity, it's also our religiously based leaders. Again, Jesus and Gandhi and Muhammad and Buddha and
Martin Luther.
And Dr. King,
yeah.
Absolutely. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, So I really believe that our religious leaders, our religious institutions need to be held to task.
Exactly. By the way, I have a couple of organizations, and I know the greatness of women, their wisdom, their hard work, their humility. They are always open to learn. I know that. So 50% or at least 40% of the board of directors are women. I work closely with them. I know they feel so many of my weaknesses. They are hardworking, they are wise, and they are always humble to work with others. They are team players and very supportive. So men should understand the importance of women and tap into this potential for the success of their organization, their nation, and their society, and so on. So the question is, what are some of the things men should do for the success of women?
Well, again, they need to be, it's not good enough to say, I like women, I support them. Men need to talk to other men. I think, doing some sort of training programs helps them to build the confidence to learn about this unconscious privilege, to start to recognize the ways in which men, if you go to a group, you'll see men often dominating the conversation. It starts early in school. Girls tend to raise their hands, wait to be called on. They'll ask one question, teacher responds, and then the girls don't say anything else. Boys call out more often, and then they'll get into a back and forth with the professor. They tend to get the more challenging questions. Anyway, that's just another example of how this unconscious privilege starts at a young age. So men need to talk to and speak out against sexism, unconscious and the overt kind, and be allies. They need to, again, mentor and be advocates for women. One of the things that doesn't get spoken about is that, women still bear the brunt. They might be out in the workplace for various reasons, but they're also expected to do the bulk of the child care, right? And then the elder care.
Yeah.
There are a lot of men who would love to spend more time with their children and their older parents, but we have a system in place that does not allow them to get off. We have the mommy track. The woman, when the babies are born, she gets off on the mommy track, and that sets her career back years if she can ever recover from that. Well, there are a lot of men who would like to do the daddy track. In the United States, again, we are not a child or family friendly culture. We don't, we're still struggling to have health care as a human right in this country. We have a lot of child poverty, the education system, but we certainly, we just only a few years ago got the Family Emergency Medical Leave Act, okay? Again, we don't have very long maternity leaves or paternity leaves. There are a lot of the countries, Scandinavian countries, you and I were talking about that earlier before, where there is a lot more gender equity as a source of national pride. And coincidentally, although it's not a coincidence, that a lot of those countries also rate much higher on these various surveys that they do on the happiness scale. So, in those countries where gender equity is really proactively valued, it's the balance. I call it, just think of the yin-yang symbol, right? The light and the dark. It's about balance. Men should have the right, the ability to be encouraged to manage in a more collaborative style and not just this hierarchical top-down style. Men should have the right, be encouraged to go and spend some time raising their children and be able to come back to their careers. And I think we would all be better off. Our organizations, a lot of the organizations also, companies they found, do better financially. The McKinsey & Company came out with a report a couple of years ago that showed that companies that have greater gender balance in the C-suite, the corporate suite, and the boardrooms tend to do better financially. So I think there are, again, multiple benefits to men supporting women evolving, developing their leadership skills, their confidence, being advocates for women. They're going to get so many benefits. That's unfortunately, it's a false dichotomy. Men are going to lose because women gain. No, men are going to gain so much more. Their companies are going to do better.
It's a win-win situation.
It's a win-win. Their companies are going to become more innovative.
But so far we maybe blamed men. Okay, they're not contributing enough. But let's be serious here and challenge also women. What should be their responsibilities? I know that the system, the culture, and even some men contributed for this all troubles. But what should be the responsibilities of women? Because women are very strong. Here is what Eleanor Roosevelt said. She said, a woman is like a tea bag. You cannot tell how strong she is until you put her in a hot water. So women are strong, they can battle this fight, they can win. But what about taking responsibility? Why should they wait to men, or why should they wait to other women? Why don't they take, for example, some responsibilities and do something? What are some of the responsibilities women should take, for example? Let's say in one organization or in a community.
Well, basically, again, I think women need to do that introspective work and deal with fear. Fear is a huge issue that I heard in the course of my my research and my interviews. Women from a young age, little girls, are taught to have more fear than little boys. So we need to do, again, our own introspective work and empower ourselves. We need to work together with other women in groups and so on to support one another instead of turning on one another, and realize that we're not the enemy, that the system. And it certainly, I don't mean to blame men, and I'm sorry if I've sounded like that. There's a lot of wonderful men. I love men, but they often don't know what they don't know. They don't see it. So we need to support one another.
These are women who should be helping men to see those things they couldn't be able to see?
Yes, absolutely.
How can they do that?
Well, again, in the course of, when I was doing this report, and I was actually creating a different model for women's leadership development that actually it doesn't separate out women. Okay. It's not a separate program. My stance is that leadership development for both genders needs to include looking at some of the impacts of internalized oppression and unconscious privilege, and how there should be different models, that we should develop our leadership styles for different sorts of, to be more flexible in our leadership styles. And so supporting women, supporting one another is a big part of it. And going to our organizations and saying, look, this is the type of leadership development we need to be doing with men, and we need to address these issues together in a non-blaming, non-shaming way. I mean, this isn't, I'm not saying this is anybody's fault. Whatever systems, we were born into this system.
In this culture.
In this culture. We were born into, cultures where racism exists, where sexism exists, where xenophobia exists. So it's not our fault. We didn't create this, but we can educate ourselves. We can raise our awareness together in a non-blaming, non-shaming way, and then work together to create different models.
I like this because, I have been studying cultures. Like you, I'm an organizational development consultant. I provide trainings to some government agencies, to some non-profit organizations, also some technology companies about diversity and about also growth in the workplace, motivation in the workplace, conflict resolution, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I learned is that many people, many leaders, they're not aware that they are the product of their culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
But this awareness is very, very critical. As you say, we're born into this culture. We have to go back and see, we have to question every belief, every thought, every principle in that culture, whether that's really true, whether that is relevant, whether that's productive. If it's not productive to our community, to our future, to our children, then we have to drop it. We have to challenge it. Yeah. But as you said, you can't do that without you sitting down, introspectively evaluate yourself and see around yourself, scan your environment and see that which of the belief systems, which of the doctrines and dogmas, beliefs are against and counterproductive against our progress, like men and women. So that's awareness is very critical.
Right. And I think what you're talking about is sort of good. I'm thinking Socratic method. That's what Socratic method is. Now, I mean, it's difficult to do it, me sitting in a room all by myself to question all my beliefs, So that's where, community helps. And, I was part of this thing called the Socrates Cafe, where people were bringing back Socratic method, which is just basically raising questions. Well, why do you believe that? Well, why do you believe that?
Yeah.
Well, why do you believe that?
If you don't have any answer, then
maybe do you really believe that, or is it just something that you inherited, and you just say it's true? So much could shift if we started doing more Socratic method.
Exactly. That's why, because this method requires a little bit of time. You have to dedicate some time. But, in the world where we live, everything is rushed, busy, and we don't want to sit down and introspect ourselves, discuss together, and increase our awareness. If we do that, because sometimes, many people die without even knowing who they are.
Yeah, well, Socrates,
let alone
know thyself.
Exactly.
If you don't know thyself, then I mean, but actually, this whole Socrates Cafe movement, there was a book by the name of that title. Basically, some organizations they have a brown bag lunch. once or twice a month, where people sitting there eating their lunch pick a topic and they just start asking one another questions. So that doesn't really need to take a whole lot of time. And actually a lot of organizational development, they've repackaged it into, you've probably heard it, the 5 questions, right? Or the 5-year-old consultant. Well, why? Well, why? Well, why? I mean, it's just Socratic method.
Yeah, by the way, this show is called the WWH show, which is the why, the what, and the how show. We try to ask questions, a series of why, what, and how questions, for example, on gender issues. So let's ask a little bit of how questions to suggest some solutions. So how men could be able to benefit from gender equality, and how can they trust that this not only benefit them, their children, their future, their country too?
Well, I think I've touched on it some, but just knowing that men love their mothers. Hopefully, they love their wives. They love their little girls. And just holding on to that, and and wanting the best for those women in their lives. But time and again, I mean, I gave you the example of the Scandinavian countries and some of the Northern European countries that rate very high on gender equity in all kinds of ways, in leadership roles, in pay, and so on. They also they're sound economically, these nations, and they also rate very high on that happiness scale and that quality of life for everybody. A lot fewer health problems, and so basically, again, we've got all of this talent, over half the population, that's just wasting away. The micro loan efforts around the world in developing nations have found time and again that when women in rural areas, in small villages, or in crowded cities are given small loans to develop their own businesses, they blossom. They tend to do very well, pay back the loans, but because the women, get empowered, but they're also care about their children and their families. They don't take the money and go spend it. They're focused on the betterment of their families and their communities, and that raises everybody's boat up.
Let's also talk about how women can create alliance with men in the fight against sexism and sexual discrimination.
Well, they need to, I always say, assume the best. Okay? I think men are very capable
of becoming
better allies. Yes, there are blatant sexists out there. There are men who are violent, and but
they're minorities, I guess.
I would like to think so. Unfortunately, a majority of the men who maybe like women aren't speaking up and being proactive as allies. And so, what's the saying? Silence implies consent, right? I think that women need to believe the best of men often, that they just don't know what they don't know. They were enculturated differently.
So the first thing they should do to create alliance with men is first to understand that whatever the majority of the men, the good men who love, men, their wives, their children, their mothers, and so on, these people, as you said, they do something maybe unintentional.
Right. Because they're not aware of unconscious privilege.
So this is the job of the women to help them enlightened and become self-aware about their biases without being judgmental, without being violently criticizing men as if they are dumb. How don't you know that?
Yes.
Rather than doing that, they can use, because women are good in showing care and love, they can win men by showing care and love, by showing them that this is they're not their problem, but they're not aware of it. So if they help them get enlightened about these issues, they could be able to create alliance.
Absolutely. And I don't think, I mean, yeah, somewhat on a one-on-one basis. I mean, women, married couples are doing this all the time, and sometimes successfully or not. But the point, I mean, that's where groups come in handy, whether it's, in the workplace or in one's religious organizations. Anyway, so assume the best. Assume that men, maybe have some unconscious assumptions, but so does everybody. I'm a white person in this country. I have white privilege. I have my blind spots, I'm an educated person in this country. I make certain assumptions. We all, whatever your privilege group is, you have certain unconscious biases. You're not aware of all the privileges you have. Doesn't make you a bad person. Or,
exactly. And you can't change that if somebody pounds on you as if this is your problem, or as if you are a bad person. But we need to have this space in our heart to understand people who may affect us. So women, they should have this big heart to really embrace men, that these men, maybe they don't know what they're doing. They're doing it maybe unintentionally. Maybe they have this peer pressure, cultural influence, and so on, and use various mechanisms, one-on-one, as you said. And also, when they arrange events, why they should arrange it women alone? Why don't they invite other men also to be part of their movement, part of their efforts in educating men?
Definitely invite male allies, for sure. Yeah. And I would assume that a lot of women's organizations that are hopefully do invite male allies. But another big important thing is that in this child and home care thing, it is my understanding that a lot of women can sometimes be difficult or criticize men. Oh, you're not doing it right. Ridicule them for how they're doing the child care or the cleaning or the cooking or the shopping. Women have to give up being perfectionist. Now men have to try to do a good job when they're doing those things. But, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We can't ask men to step up to the plate more and share the responsibility of child rearing and elder care and taking care of the home, and then beat them over the head because they're not doing it the way we would like it done. So I think that's another area that women can sort of be more supportive and invite and encourage more men to the table.
What are the other things, companies, community organizations, and nations should do to empower women? Yes, there are some efforts, but as I said, they are superficial. Like, for example, celebrating March 8th once per year. It doesn't have much impact. Or having some affirmative actions in place. That doesn't also solve the problem. It doesn't sustain the success we have achieved about equalizing, gender issues. So what are some of the things, what are some of your recommendations for nations, organizations, and communities should do to empower women? You have done research on women leadership development, so some of the methods or maybe some of the models, some of the frameworks that may help to empower women.
Well, as far as on a broader social context, again, I think if there are more male allies actively involved, I believe men and women need to talk to clergy. I can't overemphasize the extent to which I think a lot of our religious organizations or a lot of our religious leaders are helping to reinforce sexism and all of its negative consequences. So I think that would be one thing that we can do in our communities. Be on the lookout for the wrong messages that are sent to children in schools. Again, these assumptions, from the time that little girls are little, they're supposed to do paint, just use paint. They're supposed to just play with dolls. They're supposed to, behave and be nice little girls and raise their hands and only, do this, that, or the other when called upon or told to. Little boys are given a lot more leeway and encouraged to be independent and take risks. One thing that I recognized in the course of my research was I started thinking about how sports training has given men, boys and men, a lot of benefits that girls and women in our society did not gain. Now we have something called Title 19, and that's been out for 15, 20 years. I came up before that came out, but that's part of the thing. I think women need to, I didn't participate in team sports. I felt I was a klutz, but I was like, I would benefit probably from making myself play on a girls softball team or a mixed gender softball team or whatever, build up my confidence in that area. But one thing that I think sports training gives boys, or gives anybody, is that, you give it your all. Doesn't matter how you look when you're out there doing it. If a bunch of people pile up on top of you in the course of whatever and you get hurt, it's not personal. You let it go. Don't hold on to the grudge, right? And it's just, you give it your 100%, and that whole team thing. And, the better you do, the better I do. I think a lot of women are naturally collaborative. But and it also occurred to me that sometimes improvisation, that's another skill that I think will help women to build up their confidence more. Is, again, doesn't matter how you look. You can go out there and make a fool of yourself.
Yeah.
But don't keep beating yourself up about it. Oh, what do people think? How did I look? You just go, it's like, next, move on, get over it. I think, does that resonate with you at all? Something that I think that men tend to be naturally better at, letting go of stuff and get over it.
Yeah, I think, there are some physical or psychological or social roles, that differs men with women. We're not saying they are the same when it comes to, for example, women may be good in terms of, caring to the family compared to man. Man also has to contribute to support the family and so on. Here we're talking about embracing women and allowing them to be who they are, whatever their passion is, and help them, maximize their potential, whatever they are,
right.
And don't undermine them. Don't, for example, compete with them because you're different. Find a way them to complement you, to help you even advance, rather than competing with them or undermining them. Why don't you create partnership with them, create alliance, and tackle the common problem?
Right. But I will say, I do believe that there are many men who are much better, much more natural at nurturing.
There are, yes.
Children.
Yes.
Than some women.
Yes.
And it doesn't make the women bad.
Yep.
That's
not their thing. They may be passionate somewhere. Allow them to
I think this whole thing about, women just being more nurturing and should be raising the children and the elder care and so on. I really think that's societal. I think that's enculturated. Again, I really think, the yin and the yang. Little boys should be encouraged to be nurturing as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think they'd have a lot fewer ulcers and heart attacks. I think our society would be a lot better off. But again, this whole sexism thing, it boxes men in. Okay? Men, I'm sure, as a little boy, you got that message too. Certainly a lot of little boys in this country, they get the message that you have to be tough. You can't show emotion. You can't show a soft side unless it's with a woman, maybe. Or you'll be accused of,
soft
all kinds.
CC, whatever. There are lots of names.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But as you say, psychologically, these things have impact.
It really it
if you need
really
to cry,
boxes.
yeah,
It does
cry.
not
If-
allow
yeah.
men to be in touch with their full range of emotions and their full humanity.
Yeah, this is cultural thing, and people raised in cultures where they're not encouraged to express their emotions, and because of that, it impacts their relationships. It impacts their potential even because when they feel sad, why don't they express it if they are sad? If they feel like crying, crying is not only for men, for women. I mean, if they feel like crying, let cry. You know, if they feel like they are sad, let them express it. The point is whether it is man or women. You may be sad, you may feel bad, but you don't need to stay there forever. The problem is if you stay there crying, if you stay there mourning. Otherwise, we have emotions, and our thoughts, express themselves in the form of emotion, and that's healthy. Mm-hmm. The most important thing is how you control those emotions and how you get out of those bad emotions, counterproductive emotions, so quickly.
Yeah. Right.
By the way, if you have any message, do you have anything more you want to say? To our audience, if you want to say something to them.
Well, obviously, I'm very passionate about this work. I think it's very important that for men, women, children, for our societies, for our economic futures, for us to do this work together. And so I'm happy to, to support any organizations that are working on empowering women, empowering men to empower women and their families and our society. So that's
good. I would like to give a quotation to our audience from Mother Teresa. She said that I'm a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who is sending a love letter to the world. So my last message to our audience, especially the women, is that, hey, believe that you are important in your community. Your community cannot go to the next height without your full involvement. Your potential is very important to your community, to your organization, and to your nation. You have to believe in yourself. Yes, we talked about how it is very important women should stand up for themselves, but also it's very important also to create alliance with men and also take some responsibilities to create this alliance together and tackle the common challenge. Right. So I'm so much excited that we had this dynamic discussion on behalf of ISAT and our audience. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I appreciate for your coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear our viewers, this is my hope that you enjoyed our discussion. This is about how we should support women to go at the front and taking leadership, because they constitute more than half of our community, and they are smart, wise, and without their involvement, we cannot really overcome the challenges that our countries are facing. For example, if you are an Ethiopian, you know the challenges that we are facing. We can't come out of poverty. We can't overcome dictatorship. We can't help our environment become better and save it from degradation. We cannot really take to the next height and become great nation without the involvement of women and without empowering and allowing them to become leaders. You may be a man, hey, I believe that embracing women is for your own benefit, for your children, for your country. So open up your heart and be vulnerable if that is the need that you should take in, and embrace women and work together for the betterment of your family, your country, and your nation and your community. Thank you very much for watching.